Today, we are diving deep into what might just be the most important global rivalry of our lifetime. You know, it's a conflict that's quietly reshaping our world in ways we're only just starting to see. This is the story of two giants, America and China, locked in an epic struggle for the future.
And you've got to understand, this isn't your grandparents' Cold War. Not even close. The weapons have totally changed. The battlefields, they're not just physical territories anymore. They are digital. They're economic, they're technological. We're talking about a war being fought in boardrooms, on stock exchanges, and believe it or not, inside the microscopic circuits of a tiny little chip.
So, to get our heads around all this, we're going to break it down into 4 key battlegrounds. First, we'll look at the big power shift that got us here. Then, we'll dive into the super important chip and tech wars. After that, the economic and currency clash. And finally, we'll ask the big question: what does all this mean for us? Are we heading for a world that's split in two?
All right, so how did we even get to this point? I mean, this rivalry didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's been building for decades, really, all based on a global dynamic that is now being completely turned on its head. For the longest time, the relationship between the two countries had this really clear, almost perfect structure. On one side, you had China, right? The world's factory. They mastered manufacturing, they mastered global supply chains. And on the other side, you had America, the world's innovator, leading the way in design, tech, and branding. But what happens when the factory decides it doesn't just want to build things anymore? What happens when it decides it wants to be the innovator too? Well, that's when the sparks really start to fly.
And you can see this tension just ratcheting up in the last few years. It really kicked off in 2015 with China's Made in China 2025 plan, which was, let's be honest, a direct challenge to America's tech dominance. By 2018, the US fired back with a full-blown trade war. But the thing that really poured gasoline on the fire was the pandemic in 2020. That was a huge wake-up call for everyone, showing just how fragile our global supply chains were, and it kicked this whole idea of decoupling the two economies into overdrive.
And that brings us to what many people think is the absolute heart of this new war. Forget land, forget territory. The real prize here is control over our digital future. And believe it or not, that entire future is being built on one tiny, incredibly complex piece of technology.
Yeah, we're talking about semiconductors, those little microchips that are basically the brains inside every single modern device. They're in your phone, they're in your car, and most importantly, they're the engine behind artificial intelligence. That's why this is framed as a struggle for control. This isn't just friendly competition, it's a zero-sum game. The thinking is, whoever controls the chips, well, they control the future. Period.
So what's America's game plan? It's basically a 3-punch combo. First punch, ban. Starve key Chinese tech companies of the advanced chips they desperately need. Second punch, ally. Build a united front with other tech powerhouses. Think Japan, South Korea, the Netherlands, to make sure that ban really sticks. And the third punch, build. Pour billions of dollars into bringing chip manufacturing back home to the US, so it's not dependent on anyone else. It's a full-court press to take back control of the game.
But China is definitely not just taking this lying down. Oh no, they have launched an all-out national mission to become technologically self-sufficient. They're pumping insane amounts of money into their own chip companies, like SMIC. But it's not just about the tech. They're also fighting a war of words, pushing propaganda that paints the US as this fading empire, desperately trying to keep China down. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the economic battlefield. Because while the tech war is about what's coming next, the economic fight is happening right now. It's a brawl for financial dominance, and what's really interesting is that both of these giants are stepping into the ring with some pretty serious weaknesses.
And this just shows you that neither side is invincible. Far from it. America has been wrestling with stubborn inflation that's putting a real squeeze on its economy. Meanwhile, China is facing a crisis of epic proportions in its real estate market, which was a huge engine of its growth for decades, and now it's threatening to come crashing down. It's kind of like two heavyweight boxers entering the ring, but both of them are already nursing some major injuries.
You see, for decades, America's ultimate ace in the hole has been the US dollar. As the world's go-to currency, it gives the United States an incredible amount of power. But that dominance is now being challenged from all sides. You've got the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, actively looking for alternatives. You're seeing huge trade deals, especially in energy, being done in the Chinese yuan, and just the simple fact that the world is decoupling means fewer and fewer transactions are automatically done in dollars.
So, This is a much bigger deal than just watching currencies fluctuate. A major shift away from a dollar-dominated world would literally rewire the entire global financial system. The question isn't just who's going to be on top, it's what will the rules of the entire economic game even be for the next 100 years.
And this brings us to our final and maybe most important section. What is the ultimate consequence of all this rivalry? I mean, if these two superpowers are on a collision course, what does that mean for the rest of us? Well, the scary but logical conclusion is a world that's forced to choose a side.
Because underneath all the tech and the money, this is really a battle between two completely different visions for how the world should work. The US is selling its model of democracy and free open markets. China, on the other hand, is pushing its model of state-controlled capitalism, promising economic growth and stability without all that, messy political stuff. And they are both in a global competition to win hearts and minds.
And you can see these competing ideas hardening into actual alliances. On one side, you have the U.S. strengthening partnerships like the Quad with India, Japan, and Australia, which is pretty clearly a strategic bloc aimed at containing China. And on the other side, you see China and Russia getting closer and closer, creating this powerful counterweight. The lines on the world map are literally being redrawn as we speak.
So what's the end game here? Well, a lot of analysts are predicting a future that sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction novel. A world that is literally split in two. Just try to imagine that. Two completely separate spheres. One operating with an open internet and a dollar-based economy, and the other with a filtered, state-controlled internet and an economy centered on the yuan. Everything from the apps on your phone to the news you read to the money you use. It could all depend on which sphere your country falls into.
And that leads us to this really chilling thought. The First Cold War divided the world with an iron curtain made of concrete and barbed wire. This next one could be so much more personal. A division that doesn't just run between countries, but runs right through the digital tools we use every single day, the financial systems we depend on, and maybe even the very way we think about the world.
Which brings us to the final trillion-dollar question. In this new kind of Cold War, fought with silicon and software instead of steel and spies, who is going to win? Who will get to write the code for the 21st century? The answer to that is going to define the world for all of us, and the future is being decided right now.